fantastic. We're the best. When did you post it?
Just a second ago.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're a consummate professional, buddy. I appreciate you. Um, and it looks like we're live on that side, so I'm going to transition us live. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today, we're 3 days out from the launch of the Snyder Cut, so we're going to talk about WandaVision. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, on this podcast, we talk about games, but we also talk about nerd culture stuff. We obviously did our gigantic MCU review at the end of last year, and because all of the movies went away, the Disney Plus series are, I guess, going to have to, come to the rescue. And so we're going to talk about WandaVision. WandaVision came out a couple of weeks ago, and it is fully out as of right now. Those kind of the talk of the town for a while, right? Like every week, people were tuning into WandaVision and then, posting their theories on Twitter and everything else. But I binged it. You binged it, right?
Yes, I binged it as well. And I think that I've actually got a point about this. But just warning for the folks at home, we're going to spoil WandaVision. All the big twists and turns that happen with it.
WandaVision is definitely one of those shows that doesn't want you to be spoiled on it, I guess.
Yeah.
It cares a lot about spoilers, it seems, compared to other shows.
But before we go behind the spoiler wall, you want to give like a quick spoiler-free impression?
My spoiler-free impression is that WandaVision is more ambitious than it is good. It kind of lives in that, like that Assassin's Creed section of my brain. I mean, Assassin's Creed was much worse than this. But it is I admire that it was really shooting for the stars, even if I think it fucked up along the way. Even though these are the types of series that I really do resonate with. Like I like to see like interesting, neat shit. I guess it feels to me like I won't want to go back and watch. WandaVision feels very one and done compared to something that's more evergreen that I could come back to over and over again. So given all of that, a soft recommend, I guess, is where I end up on it.
Yep. And I'm gonna be similar. I'm gonna say it's good, not great. And I'm gonna say that. And obviously I can't know this because I didn't watch it in time, but I suspect it's better binged. And so I guess if you're here and you're considering watching it one episode a week at a time for like some reason, don't do that. Just watch it all at once, or like don't. There's no situation in which you're gonna watch it 1 week at a time and like have to worry about like philosophy, or doing fan theories in between. But I feel like that's part of like I think that would have played negatively if I had watched it week over week. And I think that's
nuts. I would have hated this. I think a lot of to be honest, I think a lot of the show's problems are kind of derived from that construction.
Right.
But we can talk about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we should probably get behind the spoiler curtain at this point. So here's your warning: we're gonna spoil the show. Also probably several associated Marvel movies, maybe some Marvel comics, etc., etc. So 3, 2, 1. That's your warning. All right. So, I think the big thing to talk about is probably like the big twist, like the big twist that like Agatha is behind everything, and that like I think the other part of that, which is Pietro isn't actually Quicksilver from the Fox
everyone
X-Men
was really
movies.
hype about this. The idea at the end of, I think it was spoiled at episode 3 or episode 4, or not spoiled, but like revealed, right? And everyone was very hype about this on my Twitter at the time. I tried to keep myself like lightly spoiled, but there's no way I was going to stop getting spoiled for this thing. And everyone's theories were, this is how they're going to do mutants in the MCU, right? Wanda will bring over the mutants with her reality warping powers. The Fox version of Quicksilver, who's Peter, an American, will be the canon version of Quicksilver, but like he's displaced from an alternate reality, and that Fox mutant verse of X-Men movies is out there somewhere, right? Um, and that was what everyone's theory was. That's what the big overarching like idea for all of this was going to be, and that turned out to be a gigantic red herring. It's just Evan Peters fucking with you, like there's no more significance to it than that.
So a couple of things, just off the bat. One, I have heard that there's maybe still some hope, right? Because like, um, I think one of the agents mentioned, or Jim, the Asian agent, I forget the actor's name, or the character's name too. He's the guy from Ant-Man, is what I remember him as.
Jimmy Woo, I think is
Jimmy
his
Woo.
name. Randall
That's
Park is the actor.
right. Okay, yeah, Jimmy Woo. Because Randall Park was also in They Came Together, which was I think we talked about a couple of um, but he mentions that there's somebody in the witness protection program in the town, and like maybe there's not like a good explanation as to why Pietro has super speed, because he's just supposed to be like a normal dude, and like Agatha maybe doesn't have the like. There's a bunch of ways they could explain it, but for the people who want the Hope to be alive, the Hope's alive. But I think the more interesting thing is assuming that it's not. Was this a misstep, right? Was this just supposed to be like a fun Easter egg that everybody got hype on, and like this was a misstep by Disney being like, oh, obviously they were going to think this. Um, a kind of contrarian take that I saw from Max Landis was that like a comparison to like so in like the 90s, the WWE bought out a couple of smaller competitors, and like
Hmm.
the example he gives, they bought out the WCW, which had their own stars that were popular, and Vince McMahon proceeded to just job the hell out of their stars, like we're like Triple H beats Booker T, who is the big WCW star, in a weird. That whole situation is weird. If you're interested, go watch his video on it. And like, is it possible that like that they're jobbing on Fox for being like for having had the license now that they've acquired it? This is just gonna be like, haha, you were stupid to like X-Men from Fox, right? Like,
I mean, there is historically very bad blood among that. In the comics, they basically wrote the mutants out of the comics for 15 years, just because Fox owned the license and Marvel was so pissed about it.
yeah, Marvel versus
Though to be
Capcom.
fair, the that was under Ike Perlmutter, not under Kevin Feige.
And in parallel, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite didn't have the X-Men because it was like the first big Marvel vs. Capcom game like under the MCU, which was like a whole thing. That
Mm.
Wolverine in particular was a fan favorite. And it was from like the kind of the fighting game side. It was funny because like the guy the person from the FGC that was doing community management for Capcom for that game was like, oh, there's somebody with the same function right in the game. It'll be like he's not missing. Everybody like made fun of him forever, and obviously he's doing like kind of the corporate thing where that he has to, right? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Boy, do I feel that.
like, um, yeah, but yeah, so yeah, but my thought is like my thought immediately was that was just kind of like it was supposed to be an Easter egg. It was a misstep, you know, whatever. The other part of this too is that like uh is this is the big thing where I think that I'm much less mad about this because I watched all at one go, right? Like instead of like theorizing for weeks about what it was, I just like saw within like an hour or two what
Yeah,
the answer
that
was.
would have really pissed me off, I feel like. If I was the type of person who was theorizing for the intervening month, and then at the end of episode 7 they reveal, that like, whoa, it was just like a fake out all along. I actually do think that there's a pretty okay chance that Evan Peters ends up in the MCU as Pietro, just because we know we're walking into multiverse territory. Doctor Strange 2 is gonna be multiverse stuff. Um the subtitle of Doctor Strange 2 is The Multiverse of Madness. Um, and we've already seen J. Jonah Jameson return, played by J.K. Simmons, who is obviously like very, very well regarded. So I imagine Marvel will probably end up bringing in characters like that, right? Like the best, the brightest, everyone's favorites, right? We all love J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, and so he's gonna hop over, but we're not canonizing Toby Maguire, right? We're not canonizing Andrew Garfield, but maybe we're gonna pull someone in from those movies, though I don't know who, because both those movies were garbage. Um,
Well, we're
So,
getting
like,
we know that what's his name? The the electric dude is reprising his role, right?
oh shit, yeah, you're right. And technically, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are showing up in the third Spider-Man movie because everyone is finding out they're being cast in the third Spider-Man movie at this point. Um, I feel like at the like at the end of the day, if Marvel wants to, they can find plenty of these kinds of characters, right? Ian McKellen as Magneto, or like maybe they get Patrick Stewart as Professor X or something like that, right? Like just for one, like one last go or something kind of along those
Yeah,
lines, right?
Hugh
Like if you
Jackman,
are,
right? Like he's the big one, I
yeah,
think. Everybody loves Hugh Jackman. And Ryan
yeah, and
Reynolds,
like
Deadpool is definitely showing up at some point. I think we know that, right? Like,
yeah. So like I feel like they will keep the good stuff, get rid of the get rid of the detritus, so to speak, and maybe Evan Peters as Quicksilver counts as good stuff. I actually kind of like Evan Peters as Quicksilver, just from the perspective of like, first of all, I kind of think Quicksilver's pretty boring. He doesn't have like a lot going on, and Evan Peters gave him a lot of like verve and personality, and he kind of has the right verve and personality for the MCU, right? Like I could very easily see him just kind of step in as that, like funny but not too funny,
right.
smarty pants
Which is
kind
like
of like
basically
it's
the character
bread
he
and
was
butter.
playing in WandaVision, right? Like he was playing
Yeah.
his MC or his X-Men character. He wasn't playing, I mean, not that Pietro had a lot of characterization, but he was playing the X-Men Quicksilver, not the MCU Quicksilver.
Yeah, but I don't think that this means that we're gonna get, I don't remember the actress name, Sansa Stark as Jean Grey, or
Yeah,
Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, or any of the intervening,
right.
types of any of the intervening like types of casting that went on. Like, they're gonna want to recast all that stuff, and that's fine.
Are we gonna get Wesley Snipes as Blade? um, that's
Well, there is a Blade thing. It's
right. Oh,
Mahershala
I
Ali,
forgot
who
about
has
that.
weirdly already played a character in the MCU in the Luke Cage show. But I guess we're just
Well,
gonna
the
let that
Netflix
go.
shows I think are decanonized, right? I
Are
bet
they
you
decanonized?
I bet you could pull like they could do the same thing, right? Because they're like, you could pull in the pieces you wanted and just like be like that's technically not part of this or whatever, right? Like if you wanted to pull David Tennant in, that's the right actor, right, for Purple Man
Mm,
or yeah, because like
yeah.
that character was great, right? And he's dead,
I
and you
have a
can make him
feeling
not.
that one of them might show up. Honestly, I kind of liked all of the core characters except for Iron Man, really. So like, if Charlie Cox showed up as Daredevil, like I thought Daredevil was bad, but if John Berg, who is Punisher, shows up in an MCU movie, that would not be weird to me. I feel like that
Yeah,
would be pretty sweet, to be honest.
yeah. No, I like. There's a lot of stuff here, but
But
we've got
but this is kind of my thing though. This We spent 15 minutes on this. This is the stuff that I think is ultimately superfluous, right?
right.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't enhance the actuality of the show, but the show is constructed around it,
I
right?
mean,
So
I
kind of
think
my core philosophy with WandaVision is that it's structured a little bit backwards, right? It kind of it takes for granted a lot of the things that it never justifies, and then it justifies them in the back half of the show, which I felt was very off-putting and like weird, which is maybe just my weird interaction with the MCU in general, but it definitely like carried through to WandaVision. Though I am honestly very glad that they added this stuff, because this is the exact kind of thing that I was so mad about, like when we were doing our big MCU review, and I was talking about how frustrated I was with Civil War and with the Infinity War saga, pair of movies or whatever. Like it felt like it had kind of lost its heart. There's a lot of heart in this show,
yeah, no,
but all of the heart comes in episode 8, which is like fuck, you know.
I mean, I think that you get Wanda's arc through the whole thing, right? Like I think they do a good job of like giving Wanda emotional resonance because something's up, right? Like
Mm.
um I think the whole Agatha reveal was just kind of, I don't want to call it bad because like it makes sense to me. Like it's kind of like a plot device if that makes sense, but like I don't think it was done well, right? And maybe this
Ah,
is
boy.
pitched up to the Pietro thing. Do you know anything about like Agatha as a character? Because I like read
Mhm.
read like the Marvel thing. It was like
It's
she
interesting.
was
She's not a
like
villain.
the Fantastic Four's nurse or something, right? It was
Yeah,
like
well, so the thing with Agatha, okay, so here's like a brief overview of the Scarlet Witch, right? The Scarlet Witch is a mutant, and she has the mutant ability to alter probabilities, right? So she could make weirdly improbable things happen, like you go to shoot her and your gun jams, right? That's something that happens, but she can manipulate the probability to make that happen, right? And then, but the thing is that she her mom is like a crazy powerful witch whose name I don't remember, right? From this magical mountain in Europe in the Swiss Alps in the MCU called Mount Wundagore, right? Magneto sleeps with the mom, and Pietro and Wanda are like their offspring. Wanda then like goes back to Mount Wundagore and like trains in this like hex magic, chaos magic or whatever, and the person she trains with is Agatha Harkness, who is not a bad guy. She's just like she's not really a good guy either. It's not like she's a superhero. She just knows all of this magic bullshit and teaches Wanda. And that, as far as I understand it, that's like that's where that character like that's where that character comes from. Though to be fair, I'm not insanely well versed in this stuff. This is just like you know the absorptions by passing
right.
of different interactions of like the Marvel cinematic or the Marvel comics universe.
Yeah, and I mean they do the classic thing that they do with the Marvel villains, which I mean at least they didn't kill her, but they kind of like put her in the fridge
Oh,
effectively,
I
right?
fucking hated that. I mean, I was actually very excited for a second because I was like, oh, for once they're gonna undercut it, right? Where it's gonna be Vision versus Agatha and like computer vision versus Scarlet Witch. No, they just do the thing of two people with the exact same power set fight each other, which I fucking hate. Like every Marvel movie, it feels like has that like breakdown, or not everyone, but I don't know. It's just like I find that very frustrating. Part of the fun of a superhero fight is watching somebody with spider powers fight somebody with electric powers,
Right,
right? Watching somebody with spider powers fight somebody with spider powers. Spider-Man's a bad example. He's been good in the MCU about this, right? But like Iron Man famously, right, goes up against one suit of armor guy and then another suit of armor guy in his very next movie.
right, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
No, I agree with you. I also think that like the whole Vision, like the whole Vision thing was neat. I thought like having them like do like the restore White Vision to like Vision status in the library was a little bit on the nose, but I thought it was neat.
I
Um,
really love the ship of Theseus thing. That
yeah,
is very on point for the Vision, like the idea that he would philosophize with himself to beat him rather than, punch. Though they had a very
yeah,
satisfying punch fest.
yeah. But that entire sequence pre undercuts the whole emotional resonance of Wanda and Vision and their kids, like just disappearing, after the reality collapses it around them. It's just like I don't know. That is kind of like the whole time I'm sitting there being like, isn't she just gonna like go find White Vision and be like, he's gonna be like, I am the Vision, hooray, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I feel
Yep.
like they're gonna have
Hmm.
to like, like Wanda's gonna be a fugitive, and they're gonna have to like, stretch that out unnecessarily as they figure out,
Yeah, this is another plot point that I was very tired by is like the evil overlord sword is bad. Shield is bad. Like, I don't know. First of all, Sword in the comic, like Sword is clearly being Shield, but because they broke Shield in the Winter Soldier, they like can't put it back together again, sort of thing. But they
yeah,
want to have that force, so they're using Sword. Sword in the comics is not sentient weapon; it's sentient worlds, and it's about like the universe, right? Like it is like the people on Earth who monitor galactic politics, essentially.
right.
Um, and so I was just like, man, like I don't want to do like evil, bad government organization. It just feels so tired at this
Yeah,
point.
I mean, especially like
Um,
I love me an evil government organization plot, but like it's like okay, so we replace Shield with something that's just as bad, right? Like just like even quick, you don't even get like a movie where like things are good, right? Like you just get like, and the
and
director's a
they
dick.
ended, and I was actually kind of excited for them. At first I was like, honestly, fucking Haywood, that the guy has a real point. Like obviously Wanda is doing something really fucked up here, and she admits that like later on or whatever. But they do the standard villain thing. They turn him into like a bad guy, and this is a meme on Twitter immediately after the final episode, which I didn't get at first, but now I get it. It's like, what the fuck was Haywood arrested for? He was clearly doing the right thing. Like they just want, but like you projected bad things onto him because he was against Wanda, and so he just kind of gets like dumped in the villain box, which I just thought was lazy and kind of, I don't know,
So
unearned, I
this,
guess.
this so I thought the whole like outer conflict was so bad that for a while I thought it was I thought it was going to be part of the plot, like that out like that the FBI show was going to be another show that Wanda was creating, right?
Whoa.
Because fucking they like send like a, Thor girl, and she's like, I hacked the computer, like you do on a bad FBI show, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And fucking Rambo and Jimmy Woo just like punch out like the guards, like it's nothing, right? Like they have guns.
And they get taken away in the handcuffs, but then they like beat up the guys and immediately set up shop inside of the camp,
Yeah.
and it's just like, but I don't know.
This is why I thought it
I
was
hated
like
all
going to
that
be
stuff.
like a show, like another layer, right? Like I thought, like, oh, that's going to be clever, and they're just like, no, it's just bad, right?
That,
Like,
yeah, that probably would have been clever. I kind of want, and I don't even mind if there is this like organization that has an antagonistic relationship with the heroes, right? Especially because you could do some really interesting stuff with that with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? So, for instance, first thing I thought was Hammer, which is in the comics. Norman Osborn becomes the head of Shield, and he renames Shield to Hammer, and then he basically, well, and he is very antagonistic towards all of the superheroes, right? He drives all of the heroes underground. He, is employing supervillains as government agents in order to like hunt heroes. And I was like, oh shit, we're gonna do Hammer, and that's fucking sweet, right? Because you can do Thunderbolts, you can do Dark Avengers. The Thunderbolts are kind of the Marvel version of Suicide Squad, where they get a bunch of villains and turn them into like a government secret black ops team. And then Dark Avengers is when Norman Osborn takes the Thunderbolts team and bumps them up to the Avengers, right? So Venom becomes Spider-Man, and it's actually really clever how they did this. Bullseye becomes Hawkeye, and they do a bunch of these, right, where they like sub in, Wolverine's shitty villain son becomes Wolverine, right? Um, and I was so excited for that when the first second that I realized there was this like organization, but then you realize it's Sword, and they talk about whatever, and I was just like, okay, fine. I guess we're not gonna do the cool version of this. Okay, we're gonna do boring, regular ass, normal bullshit. Um, but yeah, I just wish that it had ended in a place that was better than like an '80s movie villain ending, where like the bad guy ends up in handcuffs more or less because he's the bad guy, not because he committed any real crimes. I think it
yeah,
would have been neat to have a mildly antagonistic force that's still, ultimately doing its job, and like the heroes are sort of like working outside of the law, or kind of like in in some tension, in some conflict with it.
yeah. So I think like the real reason is um I think the reason he gets like I think the real reason he gets arrested is I think he basically lets Wanda walk off with the Vision or something, right? There's that whole thing, he is personally responsible for something. I forget
Well,
exactly
so
what it
they
is.
do this thing where Jimmy Woo is like, "You're never gonna get away with this. I'm bringing in the FBI," and he's
Right.
like, "Oh ho ho! Well, Wanda is gonna erase once we kill Wanda, the other Vision is gonna be erased, and then our Vision is gonna be the only Vision, and who's to say?" But it's like, is it illegal to reanimate the Vision? Like, what law says you cannot reanimate a robot?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like, and use
Maybe
him
this
in, and this
Sokovia
is the
Accords
thing,
or something.
and use him in the specific purpose of killing a terrorist
Yeah.
who's enslaving an entire town of people in, the
Yeah.
heartland of the
I
United States.
I thought they they at least mentioned it, but I thought they glossed over it a little bit too fast. It's like they will always think I'm a monster. Well, you kind of are, right? And that was the thing too, is Agatha gets again treated like a villain, but you know, she's mostly right, right? did this wrong and you're being kind of an asshole about it. And like, and she's obviously like, she thinks Wanda's wrong for the wrong reasons, maybe, right? Like, which is like the whole Salem flashback is, but like, this I could see this spawning at like kind of like a thousand, like, Haywood and Agatha did nothing wrong type memes.
Honestly, what did Agatha do that is worse than what Wanda did? There is some real nightmare fuel in this show,
Yeah.
right? Like the woman who's like going through the motion of putting the laundry on the clothesline, and Vision is like looking at her, and she can't even look at him, but she's crying. I was like, fuck. Or like the part where they're all like coming to Wanda because Agatha releases them from the mind control, and she says, "When I dream, I have your nightmares." I was like, fuck, that's like really fucked up. Which, by the way, is the comics this is adapted from is like it's like it's like the prelude to House of M, which is from the Avengers in like the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s, right? Because what happened was in Avengers Disassembled, which was like a thing where I don't know, something happened with the fucking Avengers and the Vision died. Wanda has a nervous breakdown and rewrites reality so that the Vision is alive again and her two children, and she apparates these two children out of kind of just her powers or whatever. And the Avengers are like, "Wanda, that's wrong, and also this is fucked up, and also you're having a fucking like nervous breakdown." And then she rewrites reality again until she fucking dies in the aftermath of all of this stuff. Like, so she's like very clearly villainous from the story this is adapted from, and it is weird that they try and pull away from that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like the thing that she does, I guess, is better than Agatha. Is like theoretically she's not doing it on purpose, right? Like she's just kind of like doing it instinctively, right? Whereas like Agatha like mind fucks Ralph Boner, on purpose to achieve her ends. Which I guess you can make the
Yeah.
argument there, but like consequences,
In a certain yeah, in a utilitarian argument, Agatha is better than Wanda because she only does it to one guy. Wanda does it to the whole
yeah,
town.
yeah, yeah,
I think there is also a question of how culpable Wanda is for this in a real sense.
right,
Like it seems that the nervous breakdown she has inadvertently creates this, and that she didn't
yeah. That's what I mean,
actually.
right? Like
But like even when she is confronted with sort of the monstrosity of her actions, she goes to defend them, which I was just like, fuck,
yeah,
damn.
yeah. No, it's intense. Uh, Yeah. So this is a weird question, but do you understand like what like are like which is like a thing in the Marvel universe, and like what's their
Mhm.
interaction with like the source, like because she mentions that like the Scarlet Witch is supposed to be more powerful
More
than the
powerful than the Sorcerer
Sorcerer
Supreme. Yeah.
Supreme.
So that's the thing. So one of the things that's interesting about that is this is all very fucky, right? But one of the neat pieces of Marvel like lore is that the Scarlet Witch is a very powerful magician, but she is powerful with chaos magic, which is like bad boy magic. It's like black magic, right? Um and there's a moment in the comics where Stephen Strange, like Doctor Strange, loses the mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme, and there's a real question of who's going to get it next, right? And Wanda is in the running for that. Like maybe she is going to end up being the next Sorcerer Supreme, which would be kind of weird because in a certain sense, like the Sorcerer Supreme is like the it's like the guardian of like order magic. This isn't quite true, but it's like functionally true, right? Like the Sorcerer Supreme only uses good magic. For instance, the thing that got Doctor Strange banned effectively from um being the Sorcerer Supreme is he uses chaos magic, like dark magic from the dark dimension, to turn himself into a being that is powerful enough to fight the Hulk in World War Hulk. Like Hulk comes to Earth and is big mad about stuff, and he crushes Doctor Strange's hands, and Doctor Strange can't cast spells anymore, right? But he like unleashes this thing that turns him into, actually weirdly enough, the spirit that empowers Ghost Rider. This is all so fucking crazy, right?
Yeah.
And then he fights the Hulk, and the Hulk beats him, and that's the moment where he loses access to being the Sorcerer Supreme. It's like using that like black magic, that like dark magic. Um, that doesn't actually go anywhere or like come of anything. Like the real tension in that storyline is Doctor Doom, because Doctor Doom is actually the second best wizard in like the Marvel cinematic or like the Marvel Comics universe. He's he's an incredibly powerful spellcaster at the same time as being like a tech genius with his armor and everything else like that. Um, and so he has a lot of interesting interactions with Doctor Strange about that, but it ends up in another guy like Doctor Voodoo, I think is his name, who is who's like a voodoo caster guy or whatever. It doesn't really go anywhere. But anyway, I wonder if they're gonna do anything with this in the MCU because I think that that would be neat, to be honest. Because it was always played up that like the chaos magic that Scarlet Witch is trained in is bad. It is like dark magic, and it is the kind of dark magic that the Sorcerer Supreme has like a responsibility to contain and control, right? Like as we've seen with him, kind of containing and controlling like Loki, for instance. But they never that clash has never really like kind of come to the forefront. So it would be neat if like in Doctor Strange 2 or something like that, right? Like there's legitimate tension there between him and between Wanda.
Yeah, I mean, I could also see like the thing that pops into my mind is like it's going to be like always bet on dumb, which is like the prophecy says she's the Scarlet the Scarlet Witch is more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, and then Doctor Strange is like, well then I will hand down the title of the Sorcerer Supreme or whatever, and like that's like how
Oh
you
my
get a
god.
like that's exactly the type of dumb thing that happens. So
That is exactly like the type of dumb thing that happens. I have to say, it was very nice that they called her the Scarlet Witch and that she had I guess not quite classic version, but like a close to classic version of that Scarlet Witch with like the weird headdress thing.
yeah.
And that like when they do the Halloween episode, she's dressed as a Sokovian fortune teller, right?
Yeah, and Vision is dressed
Which
as a luchador, right? Like, which I
yeah,
couldn't
which
tell if
I
that
was
was.
like, okay, I guess. I actually thought they were gonna do Mount Wundagore stuff with that, but they never mentioned Mount Wundagore over the course of the whole series, which I was just like, okay, wow. I guess like I guess not. I was also hoping that they would do a Magneto thing, but they didn't do that either. So big
I,
rip.
I will say, kind of on a technical level, I thought like the whole like the following different sitcoms through the ages, I thought was really well done. I thought it was really well done with kind of like the cinematography and like the aspect ratios and the coloring and all that. I thought that was fun. It was really fun.
I do think that was fun, but in a certain sense, I actually think that it is part of what holds WandaVision back. Like I think if WandaVision had just been a more straightforward story about this without the sort of pretense of the sitcom, it would lose something. Like it would lose this sort of ambition that I really like about it, right? But at the same time, I think that that's kind of the reason why the storytelling got so muddled and it got so obsessed with these like individual plot turns because it reminds me of Westworld. Um, One of the things that I liked about Westworld originally was that it was very, like it was a very cerebral show that had a lot of like interesting questions being, asked about like what's the nature of humanity, right? And consciousness and all this other sort of stuff. And the first season of Westworld really got that. But in the second and third seasons of Westworld, it got so kind of obsessed with the individual plot turns week over week, right? Um that it kind of ruined itself because it was more interested in finding like plot twists that make you go than creating good drama or like real drama, right? And I think WandaVision is sort of in that same sort of sense, right? Like we spend 4 episodes just wrapping our heads around the basic construction and premise of what's going on, right? Which is that Wanda has altered reality in this little bubble around the town of Westview, New Jersey, right? Um, and that isn't drama, right? Like that's just premise, if that makes sense. The drama is right, like the drama comes into her relationship with Vision, right? Vision figuring stuff out, and as it progressed into those points, that was actually really great. Like maybe my favorite episode is the mockumentary episode where they're doing Modern Family or like The Office,
Right.
where she's like talking to the camera, and Vision is also like fighting against Wanda implicitly, but he's also participating in like the whatever and he's talking to the camera, but he does the thing, it's like, why am I doing this, right? Like this is bullshit. In a certain sense, I almost sort of wish that they had never canonized the show. Like the idea that they fucking pull out the broadcast and they're watching the show WandaVision in universe, I think is sort of dumb. And I wish that they had just kind of let it be more metaphor than an actual construct of the diegesis of the show. You know what I mean? Like, what if they just shot every episode of WandaVision with with these different styles, and it gets more and more into the false reality of it or whatever. But there's nothing about, broadcast and like the sword stuff or whatever, right? It is purely about the construction of the show in and of itself, right? I feel like that probably would have been better. But this is mostly because I hated that sword stuff. I would get rid of that in a second if I could.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you, but I like the thing this is reminding me of actually is kind of like Bioshock Infinite's relationship to Bioshock One, um,
Oh,
which is kind
sure.
of like Infinite kind of got like wrapped up in it's kind of like weird tying the Bioshock universe together, which like it did that way too much for a game and then a series with two entries in it, right? Or two entries kind of in like across the multiverse, if that makes sense.
I mean, do you mean because of the DLC, like where you go back to Rapture?
Well, that's so the the Bioshock Infinite very clearly is tied to Bioshock One, right? Like there's the lighthouse, there's like the bird is like the big daddies or whatever it is, right? Like there are clearly parallels across the two, and they get
No, sure. And in universe, there's the Lutesses, who are the people on which Andrew Ryan
right.
creates his,
So
Rapture stuff on.
right, so just kind of like Bioshock One is very clearly like an allegory for like kind of like a post not Anthem, Fountainhead, kind of like what if Ayn Rand's city came to life, right? Like that's clearly what
Okay,
Bioshock
yeah.
One is. It doesn't have any of the multiverse stuff because it's not part of the plot line. Bioshock Two, I think, starts to do some interesting stuff with that, right? Like kind of like the nationalist Zachary White or whatever his name is, right? Like and like contrasting that against kind of like the workers revolt, and then like you get like a half second of like jumping into the alternate reality where the workers revolt succeeds, and like there's some bad stuff there too, and I think there's like opportunity for like an interesting storytelling there, right? But that all gets dropped to focus on the time bullshit, right? Like the kind of like converging timeline stuff, right? And I think like if they had picked the lane on either of them, right, you could have had a much better story. I think the same thing happens here, right? Like if you went all in on kind of sitcom stuff, you could have gotten, I think, a much like it would have been hard to like make it compelling because like the thing that's compelling about the MCU is the is kind of the continuity stuff, right? Like,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
so I think the only way it really works is if like you were saying, you pull back a little bit on kind of like the showiness of it and like make kind of the meta story work better. Um, and so I guess go harder on that and like make the show a little bit like I mean maybe I'm connecting the dots wrong, but like that's the thing that pops into my head, right? Is like
I'm in a weird position of I want to defend Bioshock Infinite, which I think is a bad game with a bad story. But I do think Bioshock Infinite is markedly different, right? Like at the end of the day, the stuff connecting Bioshock Infinite to Rapture is like on the fringes, right? It is in logs and in journals, and you find out that, like there are connections where the the Lutesses are the forefathers, right, of what's going to end up in Rapture and in Andrew Ryan's Paradise, in the diegesis of the story, right? Like there's stuff that's non-diegetic about that, right? Like obviously the handymans are reflections of the big daddies, but they're not like in universe meant to be the same thing. They just kind of are supposed to function in the same gameplay way, though they don't, and it's bad, but whatever. um Whereas WandaVision is very clearly kind of obsessed with this stuff in the core drama, right? Which is part of why it is not just a plot twist that it's Pietro, but it's a plot twist that it's Evan Peters playing that, right? Like that twist is actually pretty minor if you think about it inside of the story of the world itself, right?
right,
Like we haven't actually set up how important Wanda's grief for her brother is by the time that it happens. The important thing about that plot twist is the non-diegetic nature of Evan Peters' casting, right? It is
Okay.
not the indiegesis grief that Wanda feels. We only get the reveal of that grief in episode 7 when it's revealed that actually Wanda's grief for her brother is the thing that forges her connection with Vision. And like I said, that's the thing that I want. I want that so fucking bad. That's the heart that has been missing out of these MCU stuff, right? But that's how but it's backwards, right? We didn't get a version of things where we could see Wanda and Vision talking about her brother in a real kind of like emotional way, right? Her brother is talked about even in like the show, it is talked about as kind of this like dangling mysterious plot thread
Right.
with the twins or whatever. So like that's the thing that I think is backwards about WandaVision, right? It is kind of obfuscating the really core drama of the series behind all of this continuity bullshit, which is like, oh, I hate that.
You
you
know,
know, I,
and like I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's like I there's it's similar. It's not exactly the same in Infinite, but like that's the thing, right? Like there's potentially a story there about kind of like the floating city of Columbia and like the oppression of like a working class like minority underclass, right? That you can tell as its own story, right? Kind of like they like not that it's the same story, but it's like the kind of like I'll call it like the A plot versus the B plot. Like there's only an A plot in Rapture, right? There's the story of Rapture. Um, whereas Infinite has the A plot of the story of Columbia and the B plot of the multiverse stuff, right? And the B plot takes over too much and like hurts the A plot, if that makes sense. And I think the same sort of thing is happening here. It's not this, it doesn't have the same kind of
okay,
like
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
meta
yeah.
nature, right? Like it doesn't have like the Infinite B plot isn't as fourth wall breaking, right? As you put as like we
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
it
Like
is.
I would say that in Infinite, they're both diegetic, right?
Yeah.
I think I
Yes.
agree with
Yes.
you between that tension of A plot and B plot. They're both diegetic. In WandaVision, one of those is diegetic, the other is non-diegetic,
Yeah.
right?
Or I think it's
It is
mixed,
the
but yes.
speculation
Yeah.
surrounding. Yeah, yeah, it's a mix, but it's like that speculation surrounding of like, oh, what does this mean for the fucking
Right.
MCU? What's like, I I like that stuff and I find that stuff interesting, right? But I do not want a show that is what does this mean for the MCU, right? Like I want a show about compelling characters who have authentic relationships and
Yeah.
sincere, drama between themselves, right? And that is in WandaVision, but it's just like so buried under all of this kind of stuff. Though I do want to say I've been very harsh on this. From a technical level, I very much agree with you in the sense of like I was almost impressed and I almost just wish this was removed from the MCU. I would just love to see a sitcom where every episode forwards through the sort of like you could almost do this with like a Community, right? Something with
Yeah.
that kind of altered reality, or like Parks and Rec, for instance, also kind of has this altered reality where it's like, or like 30 Rock, where it is
Where it's like kind of half winking at the camera without directly breaking the fourth wall.
yeah, like the stuff that's happening on camera is like absurd, right? Like, or like like, Tina Fey shows are all like this, right? Like in The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, part of the drama at the end of the first season is like a court case, and the people defending or the people who are prosecuting are the same people who prosecuted O.J. Simpson, and so it's a parody of how inept they are as prosecutors, right? And like obviously that is not realistic. It's part of like a bit, but it's a bit like woven into sort of the fabric of the universe. This is a universe where, right, Marsha, whatever her name is, gets a job prosecuting another high profile televised, you know, uh celebrity case. Or in Community, this is a universe where the whole school breaks down into post-apocalyptic mayhem at the mere whiff of a paintball fight, right?
Or when
Um
when Jeff Winger looks at the camera and says we're doing a bottle episode, right? Which is
Yeah, exactly, exactly, right, like that kind of thing. And maybe you could get away with that because I just think that that would be a great
yeah.
way. Like one of the things I really liked about the construction of the WandaVerse episodes in those early episodes, or the WandaVision episodes in those early episodes, was they very specifically keyed into like the not just like the tropes of a sitcom, but the tropes of a sitcom of the era, right? Where it is like, "Oh, I'm bringing my boss home for dinner," and if he doesn't like the dinner, like that feels like an I Love Lucy episode, right?
Right.
Whereas later down the line, right, mom is having a tough day and she just wants to stay at home and ignore all of the things going wrong around her. Mockumentary stuff, right? Like that is like a different that's just like an upgraded version of the same sort of like sitcom tropes, but it's the sitcom tropes of one era versus
Right.
another.
Yeah.
Um,
But
so
so like I liked kind of like the stylings of that episode and the Malcolm in the Middle episode, but because the B plot has to like
yep,
go at that point, right? It takes away from kind of like the mastery there, right? Because like the first episode is the one that is like the most kind of purely just like a a Dick Van Dyke I Love Lucy style sitcom, right? Like, and then it kind of has to leach away as the season goes on, so you actually like do the episodes, right? Like,
yeah,
which is kind of a
absolutely.
shame. Maybe it would have been
Yeah,
better if they like kind of like made it very small parts and like loaded it, like because like the fifth episode I think is like a pure outside of the WandaVision show episode, right? Like or third of the fourth one. It's like where they kind of like lay the stakes,
the
right?
fourth one.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's 50s, 60s, 70s. Then Monica gets ejected, and then the fourth one is just all world building. This is the worst episode in the show, right? Because it's just let me explain the premise of what's happening to you in excruciating detail, which is just like ugh. And then the fifth episode is 80s, six is 90s, and then seven is the mockumentary, and then it drops the format.
yeah. Um, I was just wondering if like I think I might agree with you that I didn't like the fourth episode super a lot, but like if we like sacrifice a couple of episodes just doing the meta plot, we let like the sitcom episodes breathe. Does it make it better? Uh, who knows? But yeah. Just like to because that's the only character I don't think we've really touched on is Monica. Like, what was like is she like a recognizable superhero to you at this point because she gets powers by like going through the hex or something?
She's had like a fucking million names. I don't know Monica Rambeau that much. She was Captain Marvel for a while. But I think she's gonna go Photon just because she's had like 8 names. She's kind of one of those characters who like cycles through names. This is a Marvel thing that happens
Right.
all the time. It feels like where like you have these kind of like B-listy characters who pick up a variety of different names and aliases over time. To be honest, Carol Danvers is the version of that before she really settled in on Captain. Like the true blue. This is Captain Marvel, right?
Because Captain
So
Marvel cycles through a bunch, right? I one of the few comics I've read is the Infinity War, and like there's a whole thing there, isn't there? That like
yeah, so first she's Ms. Marvel, then she goes through a bunch of them. Binary, I think, is one. Anyway, Photon is what I think she's gonna end up with, specifically because Photon it gets name dropped for was like her mom's call sign or whatever. So you know, I also think that was probably that feels pretty aborted in terms of being a storyline. Like they just didn't really quite get there. I think the character is fine, and I'm pretty interested in what they're gonna do, especially because obviously really hated the first Captain Marvel, and I thought it wasn't great. But Captain Marvel 2, which seemed, by the way, to be setting up the fact that she is like angry and frustrated with Carol Danvers. Um, for like leaving Earth for 20 years. I think that's like neat in a
oh
grand sense.
I bet you Carol gave her mom cancer somehow by accident.
Oh, well, that's Drams. Maybe, yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
or at least or like that's what she believes, right? Like that, like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah.
that
I mean,
seems
honestly, even if it's not that like melodramatic, even if it's just my mom was your best friend and you couldn't come
yeah
back, for her fucking funeral, right? Like I would understand her being mad and pissed about that. So, like that kind of stuff I thought was okay and fine. But inside of the function of the show, I especially don't like that this is sort of the source of her powers because I don't know. It's weird. Like obviously Wanda warping uh reality is a pretty easy way to give somebody like superpowers or whatever, but it just doesn't explain what she does or can do in a way that I
yeah
find satisfactory. So, what are
yeah.
you gonna do?
I think part of the problem we're going to have with these shows in general is there's going to be a lot of unanswered like they're going to use it as an excuse to put in like seeds that don't need to be answered and will be answered by the larger universe, right? Like they're kind of like they're moments in the MCU as a unit rather than like things to be resolved by by the individual shows, which I
Yep.
think work better in movies because there's kind of like a more open-ended expectation of them, I guess.
Hmm.
Right? Like it feels weird to not have these plot points wrapped up by the show. But like if I thought of WandaVision as like a very long movie, like maybe it makes more sense to me. Um,
Yeah, and I also, like they did this in the CW shows that I loved, like Arrow and The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow. But because all of those were TV shows spinning out into TV shows, it felt more and they were all very straightforward TV shows, right? Like these are all melodramas, like superhero melodramas, right? That are like spinning out into one another. And so you maybe have the version where it's like, oh, well, in Arrow, this is Oliver Queen hunting down the people that he feels are like responsible for his father's death or whatever. Um, and then he encounters Barry Allen, and then Barry Allen gets struck by lightning, and then he spins off into his own TV show where he's Barry Allen, CSI, forensic investigator, who is also the Flash, doing cool Flash stuff. Like there's something very like normal and straightforward about that, right? Like because the shows are very straightforward and earnest, the expectations aligned with them are also pretty straightforward and earnest. Like everybody, the moment that he met Barry Allen, we all knew that we were spinning out into a Flash series, right? And that the series was going to be a CW, teen drama ish, just like Smallville was, that kind of birthed all of this stuff, right? Um, and those expectations are very like straightforward, but it's like, what do you do with, is Monica Rambeau going to show up in season 2 of WandaVision?
well,
Is she going to spin out into Captain Marvel and now she's purely a movie property? Is she going to show up like Nick Fury and everything, because probably she's going to run sword from now on? Like what the fuck?
so I think so. I think it's the series. It said series finale at the end of and I think that these are supposed to only be one season long, which I think
Ooh,
lets
you
me.
think they're going to be one and done?
Yeah, I think it makes me lets me appreciate them more. At least this one, right? Like WandaVision in
Yeah.
particular, um, because like the premise for Loki seems like it could be like a long running thing, right? Um, because it looks like he's far off in left field, but who knows, right? Like we'll probably find out on the other side, like that he's like he'll probably be pulled in at some point again because Tom Hiddleston, um,
Yeah, so there's WandaVision, there's Falcon Winter Soldier,
which I
which
think
debuts
starts
this week,
this
by the way.
week.
I'm actually really excited to see the reaction to Falcon's Winter Soldier, because everything I understand about that is that that show is just what it says on the tin. It is just a political thriller spy show, like Alias or something, like Homeland, right? Um, about the Captain America mythos with like Baron Zemo and fucking U.S. Agent and stuff like that, which is very cool. I think there's a lot of mythos to mine there, and you can really kind of like go deep on that. But it's like obviously so different from what we have here in WandaVision, which it seems like it has all these far-reaching implications. Um, it has the sitcom styling or whatever. Like WandaVision was like trying to do a lot, which is what I like about it, right?
Yeah, it was ambitious.
But it ultimately, yeah, is that it had that ambition, but it ultimately kind of like flubbed on the execution because of how it structures its drama and where it cares about its characters. And I wonder if like Falcon and Winter Soldier, which looks to be much more straightforward, is going to kind of hit people in that same way, or they're going to be like disappointed because it's just much more interested in the individual dealings of um like these two characters unraveling whatever spy conspiracy theory is going to be there in their 24-esque plot. Who
Yeah,
knows?
I think I'm worried most about was like the teaser like did not give me confidence. When it's like a sorcerer, just a wizard without a hat. I'm just like that like hit me like so like this is like the worst of the Marvel humor type of stuff, right? Like, what if we had bad Marvel humor, but with like a mediocre TV series level of writing instead of like a high production movie level of writing is like my immediate kind of reaction to that, which makes
Yeah,
me
and the thing that really frustrates me, like honestly, I mean, I mentioned these CW shows. The thing that I love about those CW shows is they are just so authentic, because like at the end of the day, superhero stories are very like pulpy and very melodramatic, and it is about the pulp and the melodrama, like at the core, that makes superhero stories like really compelling in comics form, right? And the Marvel movies really don't do that, right? Like they do, I guess they do like drama, right? On this kind of like epic scale. But I actually think they have more in common with, say, the drama of like Lord of the Rings, right? Or even the drama of like Man of Steel, which is another movie I love, right? But at the end of the day, the thing that makes like the superhero genre tick is the moment to moment kind of episodic tension of you know is Peter Parker going to be able to stop Vulture from robbing the bank and get back to his high school trigonometry final in time? You know what I mean? Like that's the stuff that's at the core of this, and it just feels like you can't do that in these MCU shows. So maybe they'll make it work in the Falcon Winter Soldier. It works all the time in the CW shows. But I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Guess we'll see. Yeah.
One more thing I do want to say is that Paul Bettany is really good as the Vision. I'm unsurprised they brought him back, and I want to see him more. I think I imagine he's just willing to fill any paycheck, just because like it's funny because he got cast as the voice of Jarvis just for being like having that posh British accent, and then he becomes the Vision, and then like kind of ends up as sort of like a mainstay of the Avengers. But I just don't get the feeling that he has like a lot of other work and he'll probably take anything that he can get, whereas you can tell with other Marvel heroes that they are like that they're like looking for other stuff, right? Like Chris Evans pretty clearly wanted to get out of the cap. Like this guy is movie star potential. He does not want to be stuck doing Marvel movies for the rest of his life, so he exited pretty gracefully. Same thing with like Robert Downey Jr. Or even guys like Benedict Cumberbatch, right? Like Benedict Cumberbatch probably does not want to spend the rest of his life playing fucking Doctor Strange. I feel like Paul Bettany would spend the rest of his life playing the Vision. Like he seems to have a great time and he's really good at it.
It was super weird, like seeing him without the Vision get up. Just like I'm like this. I do not understand who this person is. He does not have a bald head and like metal plates for ears. Like this is who is
The
this?
funny thing about that, so I remember in so do you remember X-Men First Class?
I don't know if I actually ever saw First Class.
Yeah, so in X-Men First Class, Jennifer Lawrence plays Mystique. Um and Mystique obviously has like the full blue
Yeah,
body paint in those movies or whatever. Um and the end of that movie, and that movie came out like 2010, maybe 2009, right? And the end of that movie, Mystique basically signs up with Magneto and is like, I am not going to hide myself. I shouldn't have to hide myself. I'm not going to change my appearance to fit in, right? Like with these,
the real
with these
Raven.
humans. I am going to be Raven. I'm going to be Mystique. I'm going to have the blue, I'm going to be like blue all the time. Then she does Hunger Games, becomes the biggest, female action star of the early 2010s or whatever. And then immediately in the very next movie, she's like, I'm not turning fucking blue. You guys cannot get me in that makeup chair to turn blue all the time. Fuck this. Raven is just gonna walk around and look like me, Jennifer Lawrence. I'm famous. Yeah, I can exercise control over this like contract or whatever. And then in universe, she has like completely abandoned this philosophy or whatever else. And I feel like that's probably Paul Bettany, right? Like it's one thing to do like that makeup a little bit for a movie, when you're not a major character, you're not in every scene, you show up a couple of scenes, right? Maybe it's like 2 or 3 weeks of hell on earth or whatever. But if you want me to do a whole fucking TV series, like I'm gonna just have to be Paul Bettany sometimes. You're gonna have to deal with it.
I mean, my guess is it's probably not coming from him. It's probably coming. It's like we really want to like spend the money to put him in the full Vision costume like every episode. No,
I
we'll do
mean, one
that
thing I
one
will
day.
say is
Shoot all the scenes.
I was surprised at the production value of these. Like, one of the things that is also funny about these CW shows is their TV shows, the TV show like VFX budgets. So like the CGI isn't that great. Or like the shots are very like minor and they're like hitting, like they're hiding stuff, right? Like, you know, um Gorilla Grodd, for instance, is like CGI or whatever, but like a lot of the scenes with Gorilla Grodd, he's like off screen, or it's just like his hairy gorilla shoulder or whatever, because you know they don't want to they don't want to like CGI him into every single scene. Whereas in this, man, like they were kind of going for broke. Like this was like Marvel movie level VFX in action. So hey,
We budgeted for 18 episodes of Game of Thrones, and we're still pulling off of that budget, so you can have some of it.
yeah. Oh my god. Anyway, so I don't know. I guess that's my thoughts on
Yeah.
that's my thoughts on WandaVision. One thing I said earlier, I tweeted, I was like, all the WandaVision theories make me not want to watch WandaVision, which ended up being true. All of those theories were the most frustrating piece of WandaVision. Like every time WandaVision was going into stuff that people could theorize about on Twitter and like make these predictions for, I think that was the worst part of the show, which is maybe depressing because it's also the part of the show that made it most like engaging in a social media sense, right? Like this is why
Yeah,
everybody was coming to the water cooler.
the show is clearly designed to gin up that response, and like
Yeah.
I guess the end game was like and undercut them and make it that not something that no one would ever guess, right? Like because it's like not a direct line to the comics or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
But my hope is, and I said, like all the theories make me not want to watch WandaVision. And maybe if we didn't do this episode, I wouldn't have watched WandaVision. But after coming out of it, I am definitely going to watch Falcon Winter Soldier, specifically because it looks so different from that. And my hope is that it will be more, it will be like kind of more in line with, I don't know, it's just more basic, straightforward storytelling that
are,
I'm looking for.
are you gonna watch it week to week, or are you gonna do a binge at the end?
Probably do a binge at the end. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe I'll watch it week to week. Who knows? It comes out the day after the Snyder Cut does, so
yeah,
I might
yeah. I
be
mean,
otherwise
and you'll
occupied.
only be through like 6 watch throughs by then, right? So
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
gotta put in at least another 6 before you consider
It's
watching
my
anything
whole.
else.
It's made for me. Do you know that I keep referencing this with
Oh yeah, yeah.
for
The
people
the
that
manga, yeah, of like the
yeah
person walking
the
the mountain.
manga.
Yeah, I'll link that in the description for people. Warning there, it's fucking horrifying, but like
No, it is a horror comic, but it is how I feel about like the Snyder Cut stuff. Every time they release stuff, I look at it and I go, "Oh my god, this is like really cool and interesting. I'm so excited." And then everybody else is like clowning on it on Twitter. I say it's not true. It's not just me. It's also Snyder Cut people. Like, I'm at a weird intersection where I follow a lot of Snyder Cut accounts who fawn over this stuff, and then also a lot of like like the sort of like the Patrick H. Willems like film school crowd that clowns on Zack Snyder all the time. So I'm simultaneously seeing, and it's funny, you see people who are like, "Lol, Steppenwolf is just like the edgiest edge boy made of edges," and then you see people who are like, "Steppenwolf is so fucking cool,"
yeah,
like
I'm
back to
just
back.
I'm just
Anyway, I'm in
imagining.
the camp of
It's like review. The Snyder Cut is just as self indulgent as everybody imagined it would be, and all the Snyder Cut fans were like, "Yes, right." Like like the bearded. It's like this is what we wanted.
It is. It's exactly what I want. Like there in the final trailer, there's a shot of Darkseid like swinging his axe or his hammer or whatever, and he demolishes an entire, like he demolishes an entire planet. And people were clowning on that on Twitter, and I was like, "This is cool, actually." Honestly, the Joker thing is the thing that that was also this, right? Like Snyder Cut people think that he says we live in a society. Snyder Cut people think this is like this is conscious, right? That we know that this is a meme and we're doing the meme, right? And that's what makes it like funny and cool or whatever. Whereas like anti-Snyder Cut people are like, "Oh my fucking god, he doesn't realize that he's doing the parody of the thing. What an idiot." Like
I mean, I don't think it's. I put a little bit like I think the anti-Snyder Cut people are like he thinks he can pull it off, and he's going to miss that fucking landing like by 100 feet, right? Like, 'cause there's no way.
yeah, I mean, I at this point I'm convinced you are either a convert or you're not.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
I don't think anybody is going to sit down and watch the Snyder Cut and be like, "Oh my god, I get it." Like maybe they will, but
I'm excited. Like your enthusiasm for it has made me excited to watch the movie. So yeah,
that's true. I mean, honestly, one of the funny things about the WoW Guild is that when Batman vs Superman first came out, like everybody was like clowning on it or whatever, and I was like the lone defender. But now when we talk about Batman vs Superman, it is everyone saying it's good, ganging up on the people who hate it because I've uh we've like I found my people, right? Like Phalanor, for instance, um, you know, really likes BVS. Or there was one night where Shiz Suro, friend of the cast Suro, was getting really frustrated because he was trying to do the thing that is like popular to do on Twitter by clowning on Zack Snyder, and everyone in the chat was like, "No, that's good. This is a good movie. This is fun." What I mean? Like you guys are supposed to. It's like making fun of the Transformers movie and then having everybody in the voice chat be like, I like Michael Bay, except nobody does. So I guess that's a rare thing in comparison. Anyway, how was your week?
My week was fine. What did I do this week? Played some WoW, played some D&D, all the good stuff. So this is, I don't think we can get a full episode out of this, but have you ever played with like crit cards? Played D&D with,
Yeah. hmm I went in front of the cast Mark. So in the game that we played in college for 2.5 years, where I played Combe, we had crit cards where you had like the crit deck,
yeah.
and every time you crit, you got that kind of special effect. Why?
So we played with critical hit cards and critical fumble cards. And so far, there's some mitigating things that I'm playing through Age of Ashes, which is the first AP, and is widely considered to be overtuned. And I wasn't a super big fan of them. Just from kind of like, I mean, it's also like the PF2 system a little bit different, but like there's like some stuff that like comes through is like critical fumbles are weird, or like add a level of kind of like punishment for choosing to attack that you don't get otherwise, and I'm not so sure I'm a fan. Like I just don't think the game works as well with it. And like I think that maybe this is specific to the PF2E implementation of the crit deck, the critical hit deck, but like when you get like there's a lot of effects that are like until healed, which requires like a medicine check to heal, and like get this weird kind of unbalanced effect where like if you think of the like as like the two teams, right, like the GM and the campaign versus the PCs, right? The PCs, if they get crit, have to carry forward the consequences of getting crit for things that need to be healed off, right? Whereas the enemies die, and so they don't have to carry forward those consequences, and it felt painful. And again, I've played one game with them, or one session with them, so maybe I'll warm to it over time, but
Liked crit cards in the early levels, and I disliked them at the higher levels. Basically, when we were playing, maybe the best game of D&D, like the best individual session of D&D I've ever played in, was this Factory, which was like a 18-hour marathon session while we were in college, right? Where we just started playing, we just kept playing, and we just like kept playing kind of thing, which was this it was this like ruined abandoned factory or whatever. We were like level 2, and there was just like something about like the atmosphere to just like all of it that really came together. And one of the things about that was interesting was the crit cards, right? Like we got crit, and because we were sort of doing this dungeon crawl over the course of 10 encounters, right? Sometimes repeat encounters, right? Like where we were going 1v1 with a thing that was chasing us, and it would chase us multiple times or whatever. That felt really good and really interesting from like a crit perspective, because like I got crit and I broke my arm, and I had to change how I was doing that, and that felt like good and dynamic. But as we got into the later sorts of levels, first, the crit cards didn't scale in the way that I wanted them to. Like at a certain point, if I break my enemy's arm and he only has the -4 to strength or whatever it is, right? I would just rather the double damage. I just want double damage in that instance, because at that point the numbers have scaled to double damage is going to be way more worth it to me than -4 strength on him, right? And his attack modifier is just not really all that impacted by a 20% decrease in chance to hit, if that makes sense. Because like once you got into very high, this was Pathfinder 1E, right? But
yeah.
once in the math you got into very high end play, the hits became more about guarantees than about misses, right? And it became about like, well, am I doing full attacks, or am I doing single attacks that are always going to hit, or am I trying to connect on my follow-up attacks in a full attack, right? All of that kind of thing. And I think we actually did, to Mark's credit, we just did abandon the crit system once it got to that kind of point where it was no longer satisfying. We just started doing double damage stuff. I don't quite remember. This is 10 years ago at this point. But that was my philosophy about crit decks. I generally think it doesn't really work that well for D20. Like I maybe outside of the first 5 levels, I wouldn't use it in any D20 system, just because of the way that numbers scale.
Yeah, and the way we're doing it is it's not on any crit; it's only on like natural 20s. As like Pathfinder's 10 up is
Okay.
a crit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's honestly probably better.
Also,
I
the
get
math
yeah.
is tighter, right? Like I think that -4 would carry forward. And like there's like, I think the cards are interesting, but like for instance, I got hit with an attack that like I got hit in the head with a hammer or something, and so I'm stupefied too, which means I have like a flat like 35% chance to fail any spell I want to cast. I'm the main healer of the party, and like that's not like in combat. I think that's like a super interesting thing, right? Like kind of forces me to I'm playing like a melee cleric, right? So it forces me to kind of like stick with the melee stuff for a while, um, rather than rather than like kind of lean on the caster part of my character.
Sure.
But like in between combat, like we need to take the time to make sure that those effects all get healed off, and at that point, it just kind of becomes work. And like is burning time and how
Yeah,
much that
see,
matters in games.
what I think I would rather, and what made it work so well in that one session is that like we had to carry it forward because we didn't have that like heal to max effect for it.
Right.
It was just your arm is broken and it will be broken until you can get it, healed with a more major sort of like fix than that. And I think that that's what makes crits interesting, right? Like carrying them forward in more sorts of like if it's
Yeah.
only inside of the encounter, then it's probably pretty boring.
So I think I disagree only in that like inside of the encounter like I think works for it's just like a thing that's like harder to account for, right? I think ultimately it feels bad to like, and we're at like mid levels, right? We're like at level 8, so like it feels bad to like basically get like sidetracked by a single bad roll, right? Like I think like it feels less bad when you're at lower levels. Also, maybe this is the case of like if we'd been playing with it from the beginning, I'd have acclimated to it. But like
Mm.
it was just like a thing that the GM thought he'd try that would be neat and different, and I thought like I don't fault him for trying that. It's just like yeah, some of it just kind of like felt like it was like not being like maybe if we didn't have the opportunity to kind of like we couldn't take the 20 minutes in between each encounter to heal them off type of deal. 20 minutes, not 20 minutes of real time, 20 minutes of kind of in universe time. It's like 10 minutes
Mm.
for a heal check type of stuff, and it's uh, tough to I think kind of like tugs on kind of a string of like how much does like random chance suck, right? Like uh
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
have to
for
think more
sure.
about it maybe. But yeah, how about your week? How was your week?
Uh, I was very frustrated for the first half of the week because I was trying really hard to bump up into kind of the next echelon of dungeons for my quest, the quest for Keystone Master, right? Um, and at the beginning of the week, I was at 14s timed on everything, a couple of 15s untimed, and um, and a couple of 13s, like Halls of Atonement, Sanguine Depths were still at 13, and
So just for
I
the folks at
pulled.
home, what do you need to get the keys?
So Keystone Master is everything 15 at timed, right? Do it at Keystone level 15, time it, right? Once I have all of those, that's Keystone Master. It rewards a mount, which is the big thing, but it also unlocks the highest level of gear upgrades with Valor points. So I could upgrade all of my gear to 220, like with Keystone Master, hypothetically speaking. Um, and the thing that really sucked is so like I had my normal Mythics team, and with my normal Mythics team, we pulled out 4 14s. We'd done a 15 in the week before. Um, so we all pulled out 14s in our chest. Two of those 14s were Sanguine Depths. Two of those 14s were the other side. One of them was Necrotic Wake. Um, and because of the way that like the affixes work this week, the affixes are tyrannical. That like those are like really dangerous sorts of dungeons. One of the neat things about Mythics is that fortified weeks. Technically speaking, I think it's easier to time tyrannical dungeons than it is to time fortified dungeons, right? Fortified says that all of the trash in the dungeon has 20% extra health, 15% extra health. Tyrannical says all of the bosses in the dungeon have like 30% extra health, right? My thing is most of the time you spend fighting trash, right? So on a fortified week you are actually spending more time churning through the 15% HP than you spend in a tyrannical week churning through the 30% HP on the boss, for instance, right? But the thing is that the wipe points in most dungeons are on bosses. Like most dungeons will have like one or two problematic areas where like you are in danger of wiping on trash, but for the most part it is a test of like how quickly can you get through like blitz through this trash or whatever else, right? Like you're not really all that in danger of wiping trash if you're like doing kind of like strong contained pulls. So ironically it's easier to get good times on a tyrannical week in the sense of everybody doing everything correctly. But it is also much easier to wipe, so the success rate tends to be lower, even though it paradoxically seems easier by the timer, because like it's pretty easy to wipe on certain sorts of boss mechanics. The other side and Sanguine Depths are famously much tougher on Tyrannical um, than
Fortified.
they are on Fortified. Yeah. So getting 4 of our 5 keys all at that all on those 2 dungeons, which are the hardest 2 dungeons probably in the game, compared to stuff that like we just eat for breakfast, right? Like Mr. Tierna Scythe is famously really easy. I actually don't think Halls of Atonement is that easy. People say it is, but I think the timer is very tight on that one, and that it is pretty easy to whiff the timer just because you don't have a lot of leeway compared to something like Necrotic Wake, Plaguefall. Like these are dungeons where you can full wipe in the dungeon and still time the key. Just because there's like a little bit of give there. If you full wipe in Halls of Atonement, you whiff the key. It's just too tight for that kind of, like, it doesn't give you that sort of room.
But because a
Um,
death like adds like a minute, right?
so a death adds 25 seconds. 5 people dying, or a death adds 5 seconds, right? So a
Okay.
full wipe adds 25 seconds. But it also obviously adds like the mobs reset. You
Right.
respawn, you run back in, right? Like that kills plenty of time.
The point being that like if that 5 seconds is constant on in a shorter dungeon, right? Like you're gonna naturally have less wiggle room, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, right. Um, and uh, and so like Halls of Atonement is one. The other side is also sort of like this. But so we're just like not procking any of the kinds of keys, right? Like Theater of Pain. I own Theater of Pain. Like that is like first of all, it's my favorite dungeon. Second of all, it's just like a dungeon I know insanely well, and I'm like really good at it. Um, and it's like all any plus 15 Theater of Pain instantly, right? Like that's a very timeable key for our group if we can just get it to drop, kind of thing. Anyway, so I spent a lot of the week just farming. I just spent a lot of the week farming Valor, where you're just doing very low end keys, because all of the dungeons give the same amount of Valor, right? So a +2 gives the same amount as a plus 15, which is technically, so people do Valor farms where they just do 2s over and over and over again. You just completely blitz through them, right? Like it's honestly pretty funny how fun it is to go through like these dungeons that are really giving you hell, but you do them on lower keys, and you're just like absolutely destroying everything. Because so one of the other interesting things about these dungeons is they scale up logarithmically, not linearly, because the thing that scales is DPS, which is a rate, rather than like raw damage in sort of total, right? So it's not like linear. Each step in the stone gives you plus 15%, right, health and damage on all of the mobs. It's for the first couple of rungs, maybe it's only, you know, I think it's like 7, right? But by the time that you're going from a 14 to a 15, that's like a 32% increase. I think a 14 is plus 140% damage in health. A 15 is plus 172. I think. I could be wrong about that. So a 15 is just like is so much ahead of anything on that low end of the spectrum that you just like completely blaze through them. But then in the later end of the week, I did end up accomplishing some goals, right? I was pugging a bunch. I ended up pugging the friend of the cast, Lindley, and we got 14s on both Sanguine Depths and Halls of Atonement, which were real squeakers, right? Like we had trouble, but we like got there, and we never really had like any like full wipe territory, but we just sort of did like the slow, deliberate, very clean, somebody would maybe die here and there and have to like res and run back, but we got there, kind of thing. And then we got our very first 15, which was in Theater of Pain, as expected, right? Which was also very tight, just because we had some like slowdowns and sort of like waiting for stuff to happen. And then just last night with my Mythics team, we ended up timing a Necrotic Wake at 15 as well. So I did end up getting a bunch of like upgraded dungeons. That 15 was honestly pretty funny because we fucked up the key. We had a Necrotic Wake 14, and we fucked up that key really badly. We wiped a bunch of times on the third boss. But one of the things that the Necrotic Wake offers you as players is the ability to pick up these like Kyrian weapons. And where you use those Kyrian weapons can completely change, right? Like just everything for you, right? So when we ended up getting another Necrotic Wake 15 key, we went and we ran it, and we just said, you know what? We're using all of our weapons on that third boss. We're just gonna blitz the shit out of the third boss, not get caught up in these mechanics problems anymore, and like move on. And that was exactly what solved our problem for us. Is we used the spears and just like nuked down the third boss rather than worrying about like hitting those mechanics right. So good stuff. Something that I thought was interesting, sort of related to this, by the way, is that do you know who Daniel Z. Klein is?
Sounds familiar. Is he like a Riot person or something like that?
He was a Riot person for a long time. He's the designer of Lucian, Azir, a couple of other, like champions. And then he left Riot, got let go from Riot. I think he got fired actually because
Didn't
he
he get
called
like
like
caught up in like some controversy about like abuse or something like that? Or maybe
I
I'm
think
misremembering.
no, I think he called players dumb. I think he like
Okay.
yelled at players and they got mad at him about that and he got fired. Um I don't know the drama obviously, but just I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Anyway, he now is a lead game designer on Apex Legends, but he posted a thing called Game Design Chat where he just sort of like on Twitter will sort of entreat other game designers to talk about things. Something that he talked about as a topic was combat design in MMO, right? Where he feels like the rotation, right, like the basic rotation gameplay of an MMO hasn't really been innovated since its like really core inception, right? Like rotations are basically about the same sort of thing. You've talked in the past about how Final Fantasy 14's rotation, like basic rotation, is what keeps you away from that game, and
Yeah.
WoW's rotation keeps you in it. What is the specific differences there? Like, what is the design there in the mechanics that attract you to one and sort of keep you away from the other?
So I don't know if I'm going to be great at putting this out, but part of it is definitely that the GCD is slower in Final Fantasy 14.
Okay.
Um, Another part of it is, and people on Twitter have told me that when you hit end game, that the Final Fantasy 14 rotation is actually a lot better, a lot more skillful, and it makes a difference. I don't know how much I believe them, but like things just like never aligned, like never felt good to me in 14. Right? It felt very kind of like static, right? Like not a lot of decision points. Um, it's kind of like it felt like a true rotation that like you're just doing the thing over and over again. Um, and maybe and like there didn't seem to be a lot of like room for changes to that, if that makes sense. Um, this kind of felt like like they're like, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I just haven't played enough, but like it just never felt as good, right? Like it never felt like I was kind of like hitting that stride, hitting that rhythm. Um,
Interesting.
that's part of it too. So
Okay, so I have an interesting question for you because this is my theory. I wrote this all out on Twitter for anybody who wants to see like the full thought. My theory for this is that rotations are built to be internalized and therefore they kind of have to remain simple because at the end of the day you shouldn't be thinking about them, right? So like I try to describe my headspace in a like when I'm pushing up like a plus 15. The things I'm focused on is like who I'm targeting, what casts are going off, what casts are about to go off, where am I standing, where am I in relation to the other members of the party, where am I in relation to the other members of like the enemies, right? None of those are rotational concerns, right? But I do have some rotational concerns. I have concerns like where are my cooldowns? Should I use my cooldowns or save them? And should I try and line up my cooldowns so that they overlap in like a big burst window, right? Like, does it make sense for me to wait the 30 seconds for Conqueror's Banner to come up, amp my strength by a whole bunch, and then Blade Storm, or should I Blade Storm now and not worry about trying to like line that up. And then there are some also rotational concerns that are also sort of mechanical concerns, right? Like, can I interrupt key spells? Like, is my interrupt on cooldown? Can I CC key mobs, like with Stormbolt, for instance? Can I use defensive cooldowns proactively? Like, if I know that a big hit is about to come out, rather than avoid it, maybe I'll pop die by the sword so I can stay in melee and continue attacking, for instance. Um, should I use defensive cooldowns reactively, right? Like, am I saving my defensive cooldowns for if something big and terrible happens to target me and I want to give my healer, you know, however much breathing room they need to try and like heal me out of it? And can I use mobility, like proactively, reactively, right? Like, am I using my charge and all that stuff? Nowhere in my headspace do I really have room for perform my rotation, right? In other words, I'm so practiced that the basic rotation is kind of like muscle memory,
Right.
and things are happening, and I am never really like cognitively engaging with them, right? So, for instance, in the arms rotation, every time I spend rage, I have the chance to proc a charge of overpower. I might just use overpower, and I see the little thing on the screen, but like never do I actually go, oh hey, would you look at that overpower proc? I'm going to use overpower, right? I just subconsciously see the thing use overpower while I'm focused on all these other concerns, right? While I'm thinking about interrupts and thinking about positioning and thinking about kind of like whatever else. And in order to like have that be a thing, right? I need to my rotation has to be pretty simple because like how can you get so practiced and internalized at something like this without like without a simple rotation, and that's the thing that kind of like crushes the space, right? Which is why we see there aren't really many mechanics in molten core, right? Like when I'm raiding in molten core, it's like don't stand and fire, that's basically it. There's just like not a lot of mechanics, but like the mechanics like nowadays, right? Like there are dozens of mechanics that I need to be paying attention to in the Sire Denathrius fight in order to, be performing at my level, right? Like really the thing that has scaled over time isn't the rotation, it is the combat encounters that I use my rotation in. Whereas the rotation in Classic is really not all that different from the rotation in BFA or in Shadowlands, right? Like we still have a 1.5 second GCD, certain stuff is on it, certain stuff isn't on it. We have cooldown windows, etc. Um, how do you feel about that kind of stuff? Is that true for your experience? Is this just like a am I just like living in a different world?
No, I think you're mostly correct. Like thinking on my like on kind of the monk rotation, right? Like, I definitely agree with you that a lot of it, like kind of like the pieces of my improvement are like getting myself to a point where I can like actively engage for a little bit and like pull in some things to like minor optimizations, right? Like, um, because at base the monk rotation is hit tiger palm, use blackout kick, right? And like that's like kind of like the core rotation. You have to change. You can't use two things in a row or else you drop mastery, right?
Mm.
So and it's like about pull, and then you pull in your like rising sun kick, all that good stuff, right? Like uh, so I think you're mostly right. And I think you're most. I think that like I think the only piece you're missing from like classic is like challenge of molten core is not the mechanics, it's like getting 60 people to show up at like a
Yeah,
set time,
no,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, that is 100%. It is the herding cats of getting everybody there.
and
I mean, people clear molten core without even being level 60.
and like in I remember back in classic when I was playing, I played priest, and priest was like there wasn't really a rotation. It was like, or at least to me it was like cast smite until someone needs to be healed and then heal them, right? Like um and that was it, right? Like maybe cast power and shield on them. So I
Yeah,
have
maybe the touchstone is Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King. Right? Like I feel like Wrath of the Lich King, I absolutely had a rotation. I had cooldowns, I had all that
yeah.
stuff.
I mean, it also might
And I
have
was
been
really paying
different
attention
for
to it.
for healers, right? Like heal.
Yeah.
I don't know if healers were interesting until at least like one of those expansions. It was very much kind of like my I was having a good run if I was out DPSing the tank while keeping everybody healed, right? Like
Mhm.
which maybe is like what discipline turned into. But I like I said, I haven't played Priest for a long time. Um, but and
Yeah,
on
I also think that rating is a little bit different. In rating, I think about my rotation a little more proactively, just because there tends to be downtime in rating. Like, so for instance, on the Artificer fight or on Sludge Fist, right? When I'm not chained or I don't have those spirits on me, I don't really have mechanics to worry about. So I'm really dialed into my rotation and I'm like eking out every individual piece of like DPS I can find, kind of thing. Um, like I'm pretty sure I gain maybe 500 DPS on Sludge Fist just from not being chained and
yeah,
not having to worry about being chained.
yeah, no. I mean, there was we were chained together once, and I like was very tempted to be like leap buddy, and I was gonna try and like do flying serpent kick at the same time, but I figured that was like a recipe for us like to both die and like it'd be a
I
disaster.
will say, I have started using mobility. My big thing now is if my partner is in front of me, I will charge because like the chain radius is and I can still stay inside it if
Yeah,
I kind of like charge past them. But yeah, no, I absolutely get that. We got very close to getting Sludge Fist down. I'm a little sad that
yeah,
we didn't get there, but I don't
super
know.
close.
I was I was really dialed into that raid. That was a lot of
Oh
fun.
yeah, no, I
Even if
was
we
like
didn't get
for
there.
those last couple of attempts, I was like running around handing out like fucking the augment runes to people that I saw like didn't have one up. I'm like, just take it. We're gonna.
That's funny. Yeah, I don't actually use augment runes on raiding, because like high end content for me is 15s. It's
Right,
not
right.
raids. So I save my augment runes for those. But I was popping augment runes on Sludgefish just because we were so
It was so close.
oh, we were so close.
I mean, you went and you bought the Vantis runes for everybody, right? Like that.
Yeah, yeah. I once I saw how close we were, I was like, boy, like we could really eke out a couple extra percent just by putting Vantis runes out for like everybody. Um,
But yeah,
but yeah, man, yeah, this tier has been really interesting. Mostly because I feel like there aren't any bosses that are like bad bosses. Like normally there are some bosses in the raid that I'm just like, ugh, I fucking hate this fight. Like in Nyalotha, it was Vexiona. For anybody who knows these fights, it was Vexiona, which was a huge pain because that was a very like tank focused fight. In in Uldir, it was Vectis. We all hated doing Vectis, but there aren't any of those fights so far where it seems like everyone is just like, oh god, this guy again. I hate this fight.
the only personally for me that the fight I hate is like the mana eater or whatever it is, the guy in the basement.
Oh,
That,
Hungering Devourer.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
It's purely because when I always get fucking murdered by beams, like, and it's like, so exactly what it is like, for whatever reason, um, like beams will spawn like immediately as we're coming back from like doing the mechanic where we have to drop the balls far out. I will have used up all of my movement getting back and forth from that. And so like I'll go to like roll and there won't be a roll charge there and I'll just like get like fucking murked by the beam by being in the wrong place because I'm like, "Oh, I will roll past the other person and it will be fine." And
Oh, see, that's interesting. I love this. I basically don't worry about the balls because of spell reflect, right?
right.
Because so I take the expunge damage and then the ball forms and I put up spell reflect and I walk into the ball, I don't take any damage
Yeah.
from it.
So,
So I get to like clear my own balls and I never have to run away.
yeah, well, so this is part of like, well, I'm a monk, I've got a lot of mobility. I should place the ball further out. That way somebody who has to drop it closer
Yeah.
has
Hmm.
can do that, right? And so
Like
it's
any of the raid's 80 paladins who only have panic pony. They don't have any other
yeah,
movement,
yeah.
right?
Right. So like, I was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll do my job. But then like I get beamed. It's like, oh, I will roll, and then like it's on me, right? Because I could do it so that it's not a problem. But it's like I will be able to roll and I will be in the right position, and then I'm not, and then I end up
Yeah.
getting killed and maybe killing somebody else in the process, which makes you feel really shitty.
How
So
much mobility do you? I wonder. So something I was doing on Gondar when we did Hungering Devourer and I was on Gondar is I placed my portal off in like the Beamland, right? And I would just teleport. Maybe you could do something like that with Transcendence. You
oh
place your
yeah,
Transcendence to the left of the boss, and then you put. I will say the danger there, by the way, is that people won't respect it. They won't know it's there because I definitely killed somebody when I was on Gondar because there was someone else in range and they moved the beam to what they thought was a safe line, right? And then I teleported behind them, and now we had two beams overlapping, and that's murder. So
so that's the thing. That's the thing. So I don't think I've used Transcendence Transfer this expansion at all, just because like
really,
I just
whoa, interesting.
I just I don't like I feel like there's not a ton of opportunities to use it. Like part of it is like I have so much mobility already, right? And I'm
Hmm.
playing fucking Night Fae, right? So like I can
Yeah,
I have the stack on top of my roll and my flying serpent kit, right? It's just like I guess I just never learned how to use it. It's also like I couldn't tell you where it's bound right now. It's probably not on something I can press not like manually.
yeah, I get that. It's one of those it's one of those things that's interesting. I feel like I overemphasize those kinds of mechanics sometimes on like the classes that I play. Like so for instance in the Zav fight in Theater of Pain where he does the big cone attacks sometimes or whatever, I always put lock gateways up on that just because I like using the lock, like I don't know if it's good or not. Like maybe somebody can use it to escape a thing. Um but I really like those moments of like specific utility. It's almost like the like spell reflect, right? Where it's like getting to use a class ability to do something with specific utility, maybe.
Yeah, and that's like that definitely sounds like an extra 2% of efficiency that I could squeeze out of it. But like until you said it, I just didn't even register because like it's just like such like a non-used skill for me. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I get that absolutely.
Well, we've pushed up towards the end of our timing, so I think we can wrap it up there. Unless you had anything else you want to talk about.
I have nothing else I want to talk about.
All right. Well, in that case, if you'd like to email us, tell us what you thought about WandaVision or whatever else we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at somederplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@somederplaygames.com. You rate, review us on iTunes or Spotify or wherever else you could find podcasts. Watch us live on twitch.tv/somederplaygames. That's everything I have, buddy. You have anything else you want to promote?
One thing I am doing an episode of Buddy Gets Good this week, so come tune in 11 a.m. PST, 2 p.m. Eastern on the twitch.tv/Akupara Games channel.
Nice. And that's on Friday.
That's on Friday. Yep.
But how?
I don't know what I'm playing. I think I'm playing something, but I can't fucking remember what it was.
So what's the under over on the number of times you will have watched the Snyder Cut by the time you have to do Buddy Gets Good?
Probably twice. I think I'll only watch it twice by that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll see. All right. And just for everybody to know, next week we're doing the Snyder Cut, so be ready for that.
Yeah. So watch it. Watch it.
Do your homework.
Do your homework. All right. Well,
in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.